Lance Shockley, October 14, Missouri. On the night of November 26, 2004, Lance Colin Shockley and Jeffrey Bales, who was engaged to Shockley's sister-in-law, went out together for a ride in Bailey's pickup truck. While traveling near Van Buren, Missouri, the two men were involved in a serious crash. The wreck proved to be fatal for Bales, who lost his life in the accident, while Shockley managed to survive. Instead of remaining at the scene, Shockley fled, leaving authorities to piece together what had happened. The investigation into the circumstances of the crash was placed under the direction of Sergeant Carl Dwayne Graham Jr. of the Missouri State Highway Patrol. As the investigation unfolded, Shockley quickly became a primary suspect in the incident. While examining the vehicle, investigators discovered several incriminating items inside, including beer cans and a bottle of tequila, suggesting alcohol consumption may have played a role. They also noticed a smear of blood on the exterior of the truck, specifically above the passenger side wheel, adding further evidence for consideration in the case. Several months later, on March 20, 2005, tragedy struck again. Sergeant Carl Dwayne Graham Jr., who had served with the Missouri State Highway Patrol for 12 years, had just come back home after completing his patrol shift. As he arrived, an assailant armed with a rifle ambushed him and opened fire. The gunman turned out to be Lance Colin Shockley, the very man Graham had been investigating in connection with the fatal crash that killed Jeffrey Bales. It is believed that Shockley carried out the attack with the intention of silencing Graham and putting an end to the inquiry. By that point, Graham had already identified Shockley as the primary suspect in the case, which had officially been classified as involuntary manslaughter. Shockley's decision to resort to murder was likely a desperate attempt to prevent the investigation from moving forward and to avoid being held accountable for Bales's death. The autopsy performed on Sergeant Graham revealed the extent of the brutal attack he endured. Among the multiple gunshot wounds discovered on his body, one of the bullets had been fired from behind and struck him in the neck, severing his spinal cord. This devastating injury alone would have incapacitated him instantly. In addition, two more bullets were fired, striking him in the face and shoulder. Between the initial shot and the subsequent ones, Sergeant Graham collapsed to the ground, where the force of the fall caused further trauma, leaving him with fractures to both his skull and ribs as his body hit the hard pavement. Only 3 days after the murder, on March 23, 2005, law enforcement apprehended Lance Colin Shockley in relation to the hit-and-run incident involving Jeffrey Bales. Very quickly, investigators were also able to tie him directly to the cold-blooded killing of Sergeant Graham. As a result, Shockley was formally arrested not only for the earlier accident, but also for the deliberate and violent murder of the veteran patrol officer. On March 29, 2005, formal charges were brought against 28-year-old Lance Colin Shockley. He was indicted on counts of first-degree murder as well as armed criminal action, charges that carried the gravest of consequences under Missouri law. The very next day, March 30, 2005, prosecutors escalated the case further by filing an official notice of their intention to pursue the death penalty. According to Missouri laws, a conviction for first-degree murder leaves the court with only two possible sentencing options, either life imprisonment without the possibility of parole or execution. This filing made it clear that the state intended to seek the maximum punishment available for Shockley if he were found guilty. In May 2008, reports indicated that Lance Shockley's trial had been scheduled to take place in Carter County on August 11 of that year. However, the proceedings did not move forward as planned and were postponed. It was not until March 22, 2009, 4 years after the killing of Sergeant Graham, that the long-awaited murder trial finally began. By that time, the venue had been transferred from Carter County to the Howell County Circuit Court. Prior to the official start of the trial, the process of selecting a jury had been completed 3 days earlier, setting the stage for the case to formally be heard in court. When the trial commenced, the prosecution asserted that Lance Shockley's motive for killing Sergeant Graham was rooted in self-preservation. They argued that Shockley carried out the murder to prevent Graham from continuing his investigation into the fatal car accident that had already placed him under suspicion. By silencing the sergeant, they claimed, Shockley sought to shield himself from accountability and possible conviction. On the other hand, the defense maintained that Shockley was not guilty of the crime, insisting that he had no involvement in the killing and had been wrongfully accused. After presenting their respective arguments and evidence, both the prosecution and the defense concluded their cases on March 26, 2009. The following day, on March 27, the jury reached a verdict in Lance Shockley's case. After deliberating for approximately 3 hours, they found him guilty of first-degree murder. The decision brought a sense of relief to Sergeant Graham's family, who expressed gratitude to the jurors for their work and described the verdict as the fulfillment of their long-awaited prayers for justice. On March 28, the same jury faced the responsibility of determining Shockley's sentence. However, they were unable to come to a unanimous decision on whether he should receive the death penalty or life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Under Missouri law, when a jury deadlocks in a capital case, the responsibility for sentencing passes to the trial judge. Consequently, the final decision on Shockley's punishment was placed in the judge's hands. On May 22, 2009, the sentencing phase of the case came to a close when Carter County Circuit Judge David Evans formally handed down the ultimate punishment. At 32 years old, Lance Shockley was sentenced to death. During the proceeding, Shockley reportedly received the decision with stoicism, showing little outward reaction as the judge delivered the ruling. In the aftermath, Missouri Attorney General Chris Koster, along with Captain Billy Chadwick, publicly affirmed that the death sentence was both justified and fair, underscoring their belief that justice had been properly served in the case of Sergeant Graham's murder. On March 31, 2025, Lance Shockley's lengthy legal battle reached its conclusion when the U.S. Supreme Court rejected his final appeal. That very same day, following the dismissal of his last legal challenge, a formal motion was submitted to the Missouri Supreme Court requesting that an execution date be set. Less than 3 months later, on June 25, the Missouri Supreme Court issued an official death warrant for Shockley. The court scheduled his execution to take place on October 14, 2025, marking the date when his death sentence is set to be carried out. Samuel Lee Smithers, October 14, Florida. Smithers was found guilty and ultimately sentenced to death for the killings of Christy Cohen and Denise Roach. The origins of Smithers' connection to the Whitehurst property date back to 1995. That year, he entered into an arrangement with Marian Whitehurst, whom he had met through their church community, to perform lawn maintenance at her vacant home in Plant City. The property was extensive, encompassing 27 acres of land. As part of the agreement, Whitehurst provided Smithers with a key to the property's gate, granting him access to the grounds, but she did not give him a key to the house itself. The following year, in 1996, Smithers reaffirmed his commitment to care for the lawn at the Whitehurst property, continuing the arrangement to maintain the large unoccupied estate. On May 28, 1996, Marian Whitehurst visited her vacant Plant City home and encountered Smithers on the property. She observed him cleaning an axe while standing on the carport, and he explained that he had been using the tool to cut down tree limbs. However, Whitehurst also noticed a pool of blood on the carport, which immediately alarmed her. Smithers offered a casual explanation, suggesting that the blood might have resulted from someone killing an animal, and he assured her that he would clean it up. Concerned by the sight, Whitehurst contacted the local sheriff's department to report the suspicious scene. That same evening, a deputy responded and inspected the property. By the time of the visit, the pool of blood had been removed, but the deputy observed something equally concerning: drag marks leading from the carport toward one of the ponds on the property. These marks suggested that something had been moved across the grounds, heightening the sense that a serious and potentially criminal incident had occurred. When the deputy followed the drag marks to the pond on the Whitehurst property, a horrifying discovery awaited. The body of Christy Cohen was found floating in the water. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, authorities called in a dive team to thoroughly search the pond. Their efforts uncovered the second victim, Denise Roach, whose body was also submerged in the same body of water. In the aftermath, officers conducted a detailed search of the Whitehurst residence, gathering evidence that would directly implicate Smithers. During the search, they discovered a condom wrapper and a stain in one of the bedrooms, suggesting sexual activity linked to the crimes. Investigators also documented Smithers' fingerprint in the kitchen, further tying him to the property. Additionally, forensic analysis revealed that the blood found on the carport, which had initially alarmed Whitehurst, matched Denise Roach's DNA, providing a critical link between the crime scene and the victims. This collection of evidence laid the foundation for the case against Smithers and ultimately contributed to his conviction. Further evidence against Smithers emerged from multiple sources. A convenience store security camera captured footage of Smithers and Christy Cohen together on the day Cohen was murdered, placing him in her company at a critical time. Investigators also established that both Cohen and Denise Roach were engaged in sex work in the same area. Among those familiar with the local scene, Bonnie Cruz, another prostitute working in that vicinity, identified Smithers as someone who had previously been a client. Adding to this, another sex worker recalled providing Cohen with a condom on the day she vanished. This detail closely matched the condom wrapper discovered inside the Whitehurst residence, further linking Smithers to the victims and reinforcing the pattern of circumstantial and physical evidence that connected him to the crimes. Two detectives went to Smithers' home to conduct an interview. Smithers agreed to accompany them to the sheriff's office for questioning, but asked that his wife be allowed to come along. After the interview concluded, he further consented to undergo a polygraph test the following day. When the results of the polygraph were reviewed, it indicated that Smithers was not being truthful in his statements. Upon being informed of the polygraph's outcome, Smithers responded by making statements that were incriminating regarding his role in the murders. Throughout the process, he again requested that his wife be present during questioning. Eventually, under these circumstances, Smithers admitted to the killings, confessing to having murdered both Christy Cohen and Denise Roach. This confession provided a direct and compelling link between him and the two victims, solidifying the case against him. According to Smithers' own account, on May 7, 1996, he was mowing the lawn at the Whitehurst property when Denise Roach approached him. Roach allegedly told him that she had permission to be on the premises. Smithers stated that by May 13, 1996, Roach was still present on the property, despite his attempts to get her to leave. He recounted to officers that during this encounter, Roach struck him on the arm, prompting him to retaliate by hitting her in the face. The confrontation escalated further when Roach picked up a planter from the carport and threw it at his truck, intensifying the conflict between them. At that point in the confrontation, Smithers shoved Denise Roach against the wall, causing a piece of wood to dislodge from a shelf and strike her on the head, rendering her unconscious. After this incident, Smithers left the property but returned the following day, at which time he moved her body to the pond on the Whitehurst estate. The medical examiner's investigation of Roach's body revealed the severe extent of the violence she had endured. By the time she was discovered, her body was heavily decomposed, indicating that she had likely been submerged in the water for approximately 7 to 10 days. The examination documented 16 puncture wounds to her skull, multiple fractures to her face and skull, and additional injuries consistent with manual strangulation, all of which painted a grim picture of the brutality of her death. The medical examiner further observed that Denise Roach's clothing had two large slits, which had been inflicted by a sharp instrument. After a thorough examination, it was determined that Roach's death resulted from a combination of factors: manual strangulation, multiple puncture wounds, and blunt force trauma to the head. Each of these injuries led to her death. Regarding the murder of Christy Cohen, Smithers provided a different account to law enforcement. He claimed that he had stopped to assist a car that was parked on the side of the road, which turned out to be driven by Cohen. According to Smithers, he offered her a ride to a nearby convenience store. However, as they were preparing to re-enter his vehicle, Cohen allegedly demanded money from him, threatening that she would accuse him of essay if he did not comply. This claim set the stage for the events that would ultimately lead to her death. According to Smithers' account, he drove Christy Cohen to the Whitehurst property and handed over all the money he had on him. Despite this, Cohen was reportedly dissatisfied and threw a drink at him in frustration. In response, Smithers said he grabbed an axe and struck Cohen in the head, rendering her unconscious. He then dragged her body to the pond on the property. Smithers recounted that he was cleaning the axe on the carport when Marion Whitehurst arrived at the house. During his interaction with her, he claimed that he could hear Cohen making noises in the background, even while he was speaking to Whitehurst, suggesting that she was still alive at that point. This account placed the events leading up to Cohen's death squarely at the Whitehurst residence and directly implicated Smithers in the sequence of violent acts. Once Marion Whitehurst had departed from the property, he returned to Christy Cohen and struck her in the head once more, intending to silence her. In addition to hitting her, he threw 3 limbs at her, further contributing to the violence she endured. The medical examiner's findings corroborated the severity of Cohen's injuries and provided insight into the timing of her death. Examination revealed that Cohen had likely been alive when she was placed in the water, as she had only been dead for a few hours at the time her body was recovered. Her injuries included significant trauma to her eye and lip, highlighting the brutal manner in which she had been attacked before her death. Further examination of Christy Cohen's body revealed additional severe injuries. She had suffered blunt force trauma to her jaw, as well as multiple chop wounds on the top of her head and the area behind her ear. The medical examiner also noted injuries consistent with manual strangulation, indicating that she had been forcibly restrained and suffocated. After a complete assessment, it was determined that Cohen's death resulted from a combination of these violent acts, strangulation and the chop wounds, which together caused her fatal injuries and underscored the extreme brutality of the attack. During the trial, Smithers presented another version of events in his testimony. He stated that he initially lied to detectives out of fear that his family might be harmed if he told the truth. In this account, he introduced a young woman named Mimi, who was performing community service at the church where Smithers served as a deacon as part of her probation requirements. According to Smithers, Mimi had been unable to complete her required hours and propositioned him, offering to engage in relations in exchange for his assistance in altering her community service records. Smithers claimed that he accepted her proposition, presenting this explanation as part of his defense and an attempt to provide context for some of the circumstances that had arisen during the investigation. Several weeks after the incident with Mimi, Smithers testified that he was confronted by an unidentified man who proposed using the Whitehurst property as the site for a drug transaction. In exchange, this man promised not to expose the arrangement Smithers had made with Mimi. According to Smithers, he agreed to the proposal and permitted the unknown individual to use the property for the illicit activity. Smithers further claimed in his testimony that he witnessed this unidentified man commit the murders of Christy Cohen and Denise Roach. By presenting this version of events, Smithers sought to shift the responsibility for the killings away from himself, portraying the unknown man as the direct perpetrator while attempting to justify his own presence on the property during the crimes. Needless to say, the jury did not believe his account and he was sentenced to death. Samuel Lee Smithers, age 72, is scheduled to be executed by lethal injection on October 14 at Florida State Prison. His execution would mark him as the 14th individual slated for death in Florida in 2025. This pace of executions places Governor Ron DeSantis at the helm of more executions in a single year than any other Florida governor since the death penalty was reinstated in the state in 1976. The prior record for the number of executions carried out in a single year in Florida was 8, a figure that was most recently reached in 2014. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.